everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Sad Dad Games podcast. You're watching an episode of Eric's Indie Corner. I am, of course, Eric, and joining me today...
I'm Shan.
And I'm Steve. Psych.
And this is Steve. Whoa! For a second there, I thought we had a new person on the podcast. Guest Steve.
There's been a lot of terrible Tuckers out there lately.
Really one.
Yeah, one absolutely shitty Tucker out there. And so it'd be better if you had a different name. But we're not going to bring up that Tucker. We're just going to rename
We're gonna be happy with this Tucker who's here with us today to talk about some games with us. So today we're talking about a game called Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip. And this is a game that was completely not even sort of on my radar. I had no idea it existed. And then I was just kind of pooting around on YouTube. And I saw this and I was like, yeah, that looks interesting. And I played it and immediately I was like, oh, I need this game. It was like the trailer had come out like 53 minutes ago before it was fed to me on my feed and I saw it. And then it was like out today. And I was like, oh, it came out today. Well, great. And so I immediately stopped what I was doing. I grabbed my Switch and I downloaded it so that I could play it later that night. And then I beat it in a couple, 2 days. And so I was very, whoever is in charge of the YouTube algorithm and advertising for indie games, that one worked on me. You got me. I was there for it. So Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip is a 3D open world driving collectathon. It's kind of we'll get into that later. So it's a 3D open world driving collectathon developed by a studio called Sneckflat, which is spelled exactly how it sounds. And it released on May 30th, 2024 for Windows, and then February 13th, 2025 for consoles. For those of you who are new or who don't know, I like to break these down by talking a little bit about the story, and then we'll talk about the gameplay, and then about the visuals and sound, which are, some of my favorite parts about indie games. So story in this game is you play as Terry. Terry has been sentenced to go to summer school and is very bummed about it. So instead of going to summer school, Terry decides that he needs to get a car so that he can drive it to space. And that's the story of the game. You got to help Terry get a car and drive it to space. And that's the setup. So the game starts off with Terry in the job application office, and the guy's like, well, why do you want a job? He's like, I don't want a job, I just want a car. He's like, well, we're hiring for a taxi driver. And he's like, would that get me a car? And he says, yeah. And he's like, okay, great. Well, then I'll take the job. And then you don't do a single taxi activity for the whole game. You just take the car and run.
Yeah, looking at it, it looks like it's inspired by Crazy Taxi a little bit. Or that one Simpsons taxi game.
It does have the Simpsons Hit and Run. It does kind of have Simpsons Hit and Run vibes. Yeah. So you don't ever actually do any taxiing. There is literally only one seat in your car. It would be impossible to taxi anyone in it. You just you take the taxi job and then you just have the car.
Hold on. The taxi company gives you a car to use with one seat.
Yeah, seems like their fault.
That feels like it's on them.
Yeah. They're like,
that car was
go be a taxi driver.
And driven into space.
Yeah, it was. That car was designed to be so. And actually, the person who does upgrades on your car that helps you drive to space is the person that gave you the taxi job. So clearly, they don't care that much about actual taxi work. They're doing whatever they feel like. They're like, yeah, give this child a car.
They're there to make your dreams come true.
They're there to make your dreams come true. And in this case, your dream is to drive your car into space. So I love the simple setup. It's just the right amount of ridiculous for a silly little game like this. And it's perfectly ridiculous and hilarious, and it's got a very silly vibe to it, which I super like. With your premise the initial setup of the premise, you kind of go out into this world. So you're in an open world map area. We'll talk about gameplay now. You play in an open world map area, and it's not huge, but it's not really tiny either. It's about the size of I don't know if you've ever Mario Odyssey. We've all played Mario Odyssey. It's the size of one of the larger worlds in Mario Odyssey. Like it's about that big. So it's fairly condensed, but it's not, there's like two
Like
really
Super
main
Donk?
roads that kind of loop around. Yeah, it's like New Donk City, like
Donk,
maybe twice over. There's not quite as many buildings, but the actual map size is like maybe twice that big. So big enough to kind of give you enough fun area to explore, but not so big that you get lost or really need to use your map that much. Like I really didn't use my map that much because it's pretty compact, which is fun. So the main gameplay loop is you can drive your taxi around, you can get out of your taxi at any point and run and jump. And it has kind of like Tucker hit on it earlier, like a Simpsons hit and run sort of a vibe. And it's almost like has like some very light GTA elements because you can hop in other people's cars and take them, and you can just kind of run around and cause mayhem. You get a melee item that's like a baseball bat or a wrench or, whatever you want to have. And you can just run around and like hit random citizens and they flop around. You can like smack them into the ocean and they drown, and like they're on top of a building. You can hit them off the top of a building.
Good intro for kids to GTA.
Exactly. It's a baby's first GTA. If you want to introduce your children to GTA, it's a gateway GTA. It's exactly what it is. So you can go around and cause mayhem, similar to how you would in GTA, but like on a smaller, kind of more smaller scale and a more cartoony sort of a way. So, and one of the things I like about this game is the structure of it is it's extremely open. There are some missions and like things that you can do. Your main objective is you want to collect turbo junk. So as like kind of a currency that you use to upgrade your car, and you upgrade, you use that, you get a certain amount of turbo junk, you can upgrade your car. And once you've upgraded your car a certain amount, then you can drive it to space. And so there's lots of other things that you can do. There's little missions, there's little side quests, there's lots of mini games, but basically you have that initial meeting, you get the car, and then the game just kind of goes, all right, do whatever. You're not given any mission markers. You're just kind of like, you just explore and do whatever. And it's open so much so to the point that for the first like 30 minutes of the game, I was just kind of driving around, not really knowing what to do, sort of waiting to stumble into something. But then once you kind of like find your first thing and you get the flow of the game and kind of understand how the things start to connect to each other, it's much easier to like, oh, okay, I'm going to go here and I'm going to do this. And you start to kind of plan out your activities and what you want to do, but it's all on you. You plan out what you want to do and the orders that you want to do it in. And there's no difficulty curve because it's all just like this open area and you just do what you want when you want to do it.
I'm getting very strong Lego Island vibes.
Ooh, yeah, it is kind of like that. I haven't played Lego Islands since I was like a million years ago, but yeah, it is kind of like that.
Yeah,
I think Lego Island had a little bit of a linear structure, and this one doesn't so much. But the general vibes, yeah. I honestly don't remember. Maybe it did. I might be remembering that wrong. It's been so long.
I mean, you're just like on this self-contained island, and there's just like a handful of things that you could run around the island and keep doing, and just like, I don't know, self-contained activities. And you have a vehicle that you can keep upgrading and stuff, if I remember correctly. But if you're like me and can't afford a fantastic PC, it would get about 5 frames per second, and it was unplayable.
Just chugging along.
So you think you love the game, but by today's standards, you'd be throwing your PC out the window.
Yeah.
And you're still deeply nostalgic for it.
Yeah, I haven't played Lego Islands in forever, so I don't know the direct comparison, but I remember the general vibes, and I think that you're on the right track with that, general vibes, because it's a very silly, cartoony world where you kind of just run around and do what you want to do, and there's like some quests and structure for you to do, but you can encounter it at your own pace, and or you can just roam around and hit people with a wrench for no reason. That's fine too.
GTA style.
GTA style, yeah.
It's like GTA meets Goat Simulator meets Simpsons Hit and Run meets Lego Island.
Yeah, there we go. That's exactly
the simplest way to say it.
Oh man, Goat Simulator.
This is why
you
asked us to join this.
Exactly. Yeah. You guys are providing really valuable comparisons. Yeah. Lego City, Goat Simulator. It's all rolled up into Tiny Terry. Yeah. So I really enjoyed this gameplay style because I played the game with my kids, and so they had a really great time. I'd put it, just hand them the control, and they had a great time running around and just like smacking people with their wrench and driving in the car. And, you can buy a bunch of like silly hats and things. There are little hat stores all around, and you can use your money to buy like, you can get a sword instead of a baseball bat, and you can buy silly hats. And there are some upgrades that you buy with like cash that you find, and you can wander around and like go to the beach, and there's a little, like a restaurant at the beach, and you can go talk to the people outside of the restaurant and, go get some beach fries and go back home to your apartment and feed the fries to your fish. And so there's a lot of like tertiary stuff that doesn't really do anything to progress the story, but you can do it if you just feel like doing stuff. And one of my favorite like missions in the game, and the best ways to earn money, is you encounter this kid who's like, hey, my dad steals cars and sells them. Do you want to help me steal cars for my dad to sell? And you're like, sure. So like one of the submissions in this like silly cartoon game is you just like straight up are stealing other people's parked cars, and then you take them to this shady kid and he gives you like money so his dad can sell the car. And it's like just
so
actual
it's
straight up
GTA.
crime. It's actual GTA. Yeah.
Yeah.
You are literally
I'm not
committing
seeing
Grand
many
Theft
differences.
Auto.
Yeah.
But it's done in a very like silly way that it's like, it's all so tongue in cheek that it's not like you're committing crimes. It's like you're just being a silly cartoon guy in a cartoon world. But I thought, and I mean, I'm sitting there like with no qualms giving my kids the controller, and I'm like, go steal a car, and they're like, all right, like.
You're going to get eviscerated in the 5 comments that we get about being a bad
I'm a bad dad. The game's rated E. It's completely appropriate for kids. There's no bad things in it, and it's like whatever.
If I had my pearls, I'd be clutching them.
You'd be clutching them.
These are those violent video games that they speak of.
Yep, gonna ruin our youth.
Bunch of street youth out there.
The street youths. All getting high on Tiny Terry. So it's an adorable little game with a very fun feedback loop of gameplay that I really like, that you can just encounter it all at your own pace. And then as far as, visuals and sound for this game, are very, very nice. They're extremely simple. It's a lot of like simple geometry with big, bold colors and not a lot of shading. But the character models in this game are what get it for me. All of the characters are like one solid color. So like Terry is blue. And then some of the other, like, they're all very like bold primary colors, the characters. And they have these big like fishy lips. And then just like 2 polka dots for eyes. And their faces are all very asymmetrical. So it's like the mouth will be up really high and off to the side. And then their eyeballs are like kind of tilted and off to the other side. And so everything has this really wacky kind of appearance to it. And it's this really adorable art style that I super duper enjoyed.
You just like described every Picasso painting ever.
Yeah, it's like Picasso light. Yeah, it's like a less intense Picasso, but yeah, they're very much really wacky proportions for everyone, and yeah,
it's got Pendleton Ward vibes. Adventure Time.
Yeah, it does have some.
I couldn't put my
that.
finger on it, but that's what it is. It's got his derp style.
Yeah, it's got the bean-shaped mouths but they've all got big fishy lips, and those like bold primary colors, and they do this thing with the animation that I thought was so cool. All the animation is buttery smooth. There's so much squash and stretch with all of the movements. Like when Terry's jump animation is an absolute delight. He stretches out like so far and then snaps back and scrunches down, and it's just this really satisfying like badoing kind of a thing. Really, really great jumping animation. And the characters all have this like stance where they've got their arms kind of curled under, making fists, and they all like do this bobbing bounce. And so they all have this really ridiculous, like over exaggerated cartoon stance anytime they're doing anything, which is just adorable. And all of the outer lines of every character have this kind of like warbly effect to it, where when something is hand drawn frame by frame, and if you want something to stay still in hand drawn, you'll have it like, you'll draw the frame and then you'll trace over it again, but slightly differently, so that when it's standing still, it'll kind of wobble between like 2 or 3 very similar frames, but are like slightly different. So I forget the word, but
and they did it in Ed, Ed, and Eddie, and I can't remember the name for it. I'm gonna look up.
So if you've seen Ed, Ed, and Eddie, look up the word. That would be great, because it's got this little warbling effect, but they achieve that, which is usually done a lot in 2D animation, but they do that with these 3D character models where everything has this kind of warbly effect, and like the textures on people's clothes and stuff. Like Tiny Terry has pants with crawling lines, exactly.
Or
so
wobble effect or squiggle vision.
Yes, so squiggle vision I think is the one I've heard before.
Like that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all of the characters have this really nice squiggle vision effect applied to them, which is just makes everything very visually charming, and I really like it. They also have this thing where all the characters' heads will snap between 9 different degrees of of facing a certain way. So your character and everything you can move, you have full 360 movement. There's no limitations there, but the way their head is facing and animates, it snaps really fast between like a 9-angle setup. And so it's got this kind of like, you know how like Mickey Mouse's ears are always facing towards you, even if he's like turned sideways. It has this kind of like sliding effect where their face is always facing a certain way, no matter. It's hard to explain, but it just really adds to the visual charm of this game, which was one of the big selling points for me. I watched the trailer and bought it immediately because the visual style was so immediately charming that I was like, well, I need this game. Like, I have to play it. So yeah, really visually fun. Lots of crawling lines or squiggle vision, lots of bold colors, lots of silly, derpy Pendleton Ward style character designs. It's a visual treat. And I played it on Switch, and so there was like some slight blurriness to the visuals, but because the big bold colors and all that, I didn't really have much of a problem with the downgrade for the visuals there. Music is also really nice. They have a great soundtrack that was composed by Thomas D. Ward. It's very bouncy, it's very lively and fun, lots of like honking horns, and you know, when you're watching like a silly old school cartoon, that's kind of the vibe that you get from it. So lots of like oompa 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 da boompa kind of stuff. Like it's very bouncy, silly music that fits the vibe.
Have we
perfectly.
talked about him before? That name sounds super familiar.
Thomas DeWard? Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. While I'm talking, someone Google him and see if we've talked about him on a previous episode, maybe. But yeah, so music's great. Sound effects are also great. Do a good job of punctuating the moment. The car sound for your taxi is particularly nice. It's got a nice little, it sounds sort of like a wind-up toy car as it's going along. And all of the characters have this little like boop, 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 boop sound when they talk, which is adorable, and I love it. And there is a dedicated like talk button for Terry. So if you push the button over and over again, he'll do the little jabber, the like boop, 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 boop. And it's never stopped making me laugh, and was probably my kids' favorite thing about the game is they were like, make him talk, or they just drive around in the taxi and just as they're driving, Terry's just blah 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 boop boop. And so they spent a lot of time making this game visually nice and really adorable and just extra silly. It's a very weird game with a really genuinely funny sense of humor. The writing is pretty sharp. It's all very strange, but it's really good. The characters that you get to converse with are all very well written and really silly. It's the right amount of like silly, like dumb silliness, but with actual like well-told jokes and good humor in there. So just a big fan of pretty much all of it all around. And did you guys find anything on Thomas DeWard? No,
I don't think he's done anything else.
We'll do some research, and maybe I'll reference it in a future episode. But I will say I do have one slight negative. There is like a bumper car game that you can play. There's this character in the world that sometimes when he'll just be like wandering out in the world, and if you encounter him, he'll chase after you and challenge you to a bumper car duel. And I hated all of them. They were awful. They're just not fun. It's the only part of the game that I didn't really enjoy. But I lost every single bumper cart duel that I got into with him, and was still able to, easily complete get enough turbo junk to complete the game. So definitely not required, but like, I don't know if I was just bad at them, but I did not enjoy those bumper car things at all. It's like the AI was just a little bit too sharp. It was hard to like sneak up and get around to his side to hit him. And in order for like you bumping into him to count as like hitting him, you had to also boost, but you couldn't boost right next to him. You had to like be far enough back for your boost to get up enough speed for the hit to count. And so it was just like really, but the rules didn't apply to him. He could be right next to you and boost, and it would still count as a hit against you. So it felt a little unbalanced and in favor of him, and it just made it more of a frustrating experience. But every other thing in the game was a delight, which made the bumper car thing seem all the more out of place.
What I'm really liking about what I'm hearing is, like, by no means am I saying that this game looks like it could have been made for the Nintendo 64, but conceptually what I'm liking is that there's an element of absurdity to the design and to the mechanics that feels like it's lifted out of that era where they were innovating and they weren't constrained by big budgets, and studios were still just trying to create new IP, and it felt like developers had the controls, and they could just kind of do wonky things because nobody really cared, and games were just so fresh that it didn't matter what was released. And so you could get really weird things like this, and they could just be collectathons. They didn't have to be refined. It could just be just silly, and they could still be deeply fun and nostalgic because it was easy to find like little diamonds in the rough like this, because people were just running into like Toys R Us and grabbing things because
whatever box art looked the coolest. Yeah,
exactly, because you weren't looking at trailers, you weren't finding commercials, probably you were looking at box art. Things like this would be bought, and they would be individual to you, nostalgic, and maybe your group of friends if you shared it with them. And then you'd find out maybe 5-10 years later, I played this game, I loved it. And maybe you'd find out one friend later, like, oh, I played that one too, I just so happened to also love that one. Like, yeah, it feels like that.
It really, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It does have a very like early 2000s weirdness to it, that it feels like the gameplay isn't necessarily super unique, but the art style is very unique, and how the game lets you go about the mission structure is fairly unique. It's more open than a lot of little collectathons like that. And the fact that it's like, rather than giving you several worlds and like little missions to do within those worlds, sort of like Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie or something, it just gives you one of those worlds that's probably a little bit larger, and it gives you, and it just, there's a lot of things to do, but there is no like missions really, and it's just like go do things, and so it has a lot of that early 2000s weirdness to it, which I think it tickled my nostalgia in my brain, and I was like, ooh, I want that, like I want to go buy that right now. So very, very much a fan of Tiny Terry and his Turbo Trip.
All right.
Well, so a fun fact about this one that I saw that I didn't realize until I was putting this, like writing my notes down for this episode, is it released on February 13th for PS5 and Nintendo Switch. And there is exclusive content for the Switch version and the PS5 version, which I thought was cool. So the Switch version, there is a hat that looks like Link's hat from The Legend of Zelda. And then you can get a sword for your melee weapon. And there's also a hat that looks like Mario's shoe that sits on your head that comes with a little mustache that Terry can have. So some Mario and Zelda content, which is kind of fun. And then in the PS5 version, you get a hat that looks like the PS5 shapes, like the square and the triangle, the X and the circle, all just kind of like piled on top of Terry's head. And then there's also one that looks like Kratos's beard with like the red paint across his eye. And then the melee weapon that you can get is the Leviathan axe. And I was like, that's pretty fun. Like some little console exclusive stuff that's not like, because sometimes console exclusive stuff is it's like a whole mission, or like I used to hate like in the PS4 and the Xbox One era, I had an Xbox One and there was tons of stuff where it was like, oh yeah, like these 5 costumes and then these like 3 missions are PS5 or PS4 exclusives, and all of you Xbox scrubs don't get them at all. And I was like, well, that sucks. Like I'm paying the same price for the game. That's like a bummer. But this one, it's just like a couple little cosmetic things for the Switch and then an equal amount of little cosmetic things for the PS5. And so it's more like a fun little addition than like actual exclusive content. So I liked it. I think that's pretty cool. All right. So Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip will take you about 3 to 6-ish hours maybe. And if you want to 100% it and collect all the turbo junk, which I haven't done, could probably take you quite a bit longer than that because there's a lot of it. And it is available for Windows, Nintendo Switch, and PS5, and it's only $14.99. So it's not a super long game, but it's not a super expensive game either, and I don't regret the purchase at all. It was a good time from start to finish, and it's one that like I can see myself coming back to every so often if I want to just kind of poot around and have a good time. So solid recommend from Eric. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this episode of Eric's Indie Corner. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you like what we're doing, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Make sure to follow us we have our podcast here on YouTube. We also post our podcasts on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on Instagram and check out my daily Dadish scores. I do a daily Dadish level every single day, and I post my run and my scores on Instagram, so check those out. And we'd love to hear from you and hope to talk to you soon. That was the lamest outro ever in the world. You guys are great. We love you. Thanks for listening. Outro. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Outro. Bleepity doof, bleepity bloopity blow.